Namaste, it's me, Dr. Rekha. Today I am here to present regarding data management. Before proceeding to the presentations, I would like to begin this presentation with two quotes. Behind every great research project is great data management, and data is like garbage. You had better know what you are going to do with it before you collect it. Thus, today's discussion is mainly focused on data collection and management tools for quantitative study design. The data collection and management process begins with planning and extends through data collection processing, data validations, analysis, storage, sharing, and reuse. Importantly, it is not a one-time linear process, but rather a cyclical one, where insights gained at every stage can inform and improve earlier steps for future studies. That's why good data management helps ensure that researchers share their data in a fair way, where F refers to findable, A accessible, I interoperable, and R reusable. Thus, data collection and management are the crucial for the integrity, reproducibility, and transparency of research outcomes. As we know that data are the observable and measurable facts that provide information about phenomena under the study. There are different types of data sources, and the most commonly used data sources are primary and secondary data sources. Primary data collections involves obtaining original first-hand information directly from the sources such as the respondents, objects, programs, or situations, or the institutions, which may be collected through different data collection measures such as surveys, interviews, observations, experiments, and focus groups, tailored to the research objectives. Whereas secondary data is collected from existing sources such as published materials, online databases, government and institutional records, publicly available data, and past research studies. There are different factors that might affect the selection of research data collection methods that are nature of the phenomenon under the study. The nature of the phenomenon under the study largely influences the choices of the method of data collection. Each research phenomenon has its particular characteristics and therefore needs different approaches and methods of data collection. For example, some of the phenomenon only can be studied appropriately through observation, such as clinical practices or processes in particular nursing procedures. Similarly, knowledge of a group of nurses only can be assessed through questioning or interviews. Therefore, the nature of the phenomenon under study significantly affects the selection of particular method of data collections. Likewise, the other factors are size of the study sample, distribution of target population, time frame of the study, literacy level of the subject, availability of resources and manpower, researchers' knowledge level and competence, purpose of the study, type of research study, type of research subjects. There are different types of data collection methods and tools. One of the most common data collection method is questioning, that is self-report methods of data collections, and the tools that are used for the questioning are questionnaire, opinionaire, attitude scales, composite scale, Likert scale, and semantic differential scale, as well as the visual analog scales. Another method of data collection is observations, which can be done by using rating scales, checklists, anecdotes, videotapes, films, CCTV, observation guide, and observation protocols. Likewise, Data can be collected through interview by using interview schedule, opinion hours, in-depth interview guide. And similarly, there are another method of data collections which is commonly used in our clinical settings, that is biophysiological measures. And there are two types of biophysiological measures. One is in vivo biophysiological measurements, that is measured directly within the living organisms without removing tissue or fluids. Such as blood pressure measurement, body temperature, pulse rate, respiration rate, oxygen saturation, ECG, EEG, PFT, glucose monitoring with continuous monitoring are considered as a biophysiological in vivo measurements. Likewise, in vitro biophysiological measurements, it can be measured outside the living organisms, usually after collecting samples such as blood glucose by laboratory analysis, serum cholesterol level, hemoglobin level, etc. Another method of data collection is focus group discussion, which can be done by using focus group discussion guides. And other methods are projective methods, Q-search, PigNets, and document review. There are different types of data collection software which are publicly and freely available, and some of the software have some copyright issues. And SurveyMonkey is most commonly used data collection software. Another one is Lime Survey, QuickTab Survey, eSurvey, Simple Survey, Boxco, Google Forms. This is most commonly used data collection software during COVID-19 pandemics. And we all have experienced to fill the forms and to use these forms. Likewise, Kobo Toolbox is also most familiar in Netflix context, and ODK is open source mobile data collection platform. It can be used to fill out the forms offline and send forms data to a server when a connection is found. And another one is Service CTO software, which can be used to collect data, as well as RedCap software. And RedCap software is planning to use at Patton Academy of Health Sciences. Some of the members of the research and scholarly committee have been introduced about RedCap software, and it is planning to use disseminate to all the faculty and the researchers of the Patton Academy of Health Sciences to use RedCap software. It is because it is secure and widely used in healthcare research. There are different tips for good research data management. In first step, we should start early. Don't wait until the last minute. Lay the groundwork right from the start. Through every details, we have to think, how will we collect data? How could we organize it neatly? How could we store it safely? And ultimately, how could we share or publish our findings to the public so that early planning saves headaches later? That's why the next step is the planning. We should prepare a data management plan. Think of this as our project's roadmap. Create it at the beginning and treat it like a living document. Check back often, refine it, and keep it aligned with your progress. The next one is organization. We should organize our data clearly. And imagine our data should be like a well-stocked library, folders and files that are arranged neatly and properly. In step 4, we should use version control. This might sound technical, but it's a lifesaver. Decide on your system early and use it from day one. In step 5, we should develop a solid data storage strategies. Here is the golden rule 3-2-1. That means keep 3 copies of your data, use 2 different types of storage media, and store 1 copy offsite. And please do not rely only on USB sticks. It is because they are just too easy to launch. In step 6, we need to follow standards and make our data fair, as we discussed earlier. And data should be findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. Following these principles, we can make our data more valuable, not just to us, but to the whole research community. And in step 8, we should consider ethics. If we are working with human data, we should take approval from the research ethics committee so that it can save times and we can move smartly ahead. In step 8, we should also consider about the available resources. It is because managing data is not free. It takes time, money, and the right tools. Make sure our plan for all of these from the get to go to avoid surprises down the line. In step 9, we should future-proof our data. Metadata alone won't cut it, so that if possible, we should assign our data's DOI, and we should include README files packed with detailed description so that years from now, your data is still easy to understand and use. But in our context, we are not familiar using it, but it is better to use it in future researches. In step 10, we should communicate consistently, keep the conversation flowing so everyone stays on the same page about how data is collected, organized, and stored. So every researcher should think about the good research data management at the beginning to the end. And there are different steps that should be followed before analyzing the data. One is editing of data, coding, data entry, data verification, data cleaning, data creating and documenting the analysis file, and presenting the data and organize the data and presenting the data. Editing. We should edit our data for our quality, for tabulations, and for checking the inconsistency, incompleteness, and missing items. So that while editing our data for quality, we need to ask to ourselves, are the data forms complete? Are the data free from bias? Are the recorded responses free from errors and inconsistency? And are the inconsistency within acceptable limits? Is there any evidence of dishonesty by enumerators or interviewers? And finally, is there any deliberate manipulation of data? Regarding editing for tabulations, it involves making certain accepted modification to the data or sometimes rejecting specific data points in order to facilitate the tabulation process. For example, an extremely high or low values may be excluded or grouped within an appropriate class interval to maintain consistency in analysis. In every research, we should follow the field editing and central editing process. Field editing is performed by the enumerator immediately after data collection. The schedule completed by the enumerator or respondent might contain abbreviated notes, illegible handwritings, or other irregularities. The enumerator is responsible for correcting these issues promptly, ideally before memory fades. However, field editing should never involve guessing or filling in missing data. Likewise, in central editing, which should be conducted by the researcher after collecting all the completed schedules, questionnaires, or forms from the enumerators or respondents. During this stage, obvious errors can be corrected. For missing data or information, the editor may substitute values based on information from other likely respondents in similar context. If an answer is clearly inappropriate and cannot be reasonably corrected, it should be removed and replaced with a no answer notation after reasonable efforts to obtain the correct information have failed. When developing categories for data classification in health sciences research, the categories must be exhaustive, meaning they cover all possible responses. For example, if you are categorizing patients' smoking status, your categories might include current smoker, former smoker, never smoked, and occasional smokers. Having these categories ensures every participant's response fits somewhere. At the same time, categories must be mutually exclusive so that single response does not fall into more than one category. For instance, a patient who identifies as a current smoker should not also be counted under former smoker. Clear, non-overlapping categories avoid confusion and ensure accurate analysis. During data classification and coding, it's practical to set a maximum number of categories. For example, when recording patient's occupation, you might have collected a very detailed job titles. Later, you could group these into broader categories such as healthcare workers, manual laborers, office workers, and unemployed for easier analysis. Finally, we should classify our data based on the common characteristics and the class intervals. For example, in categorizing types of medications, you might classify drugs according to therapeutic class, such as antibiotics, analgesics, and antihypertensives. This helps to organize your data meaningfully for further study. There are 5 important types of coding commonly used in research, that is mutually exhaustive, exclusiveness, unidimensional, alphabetic coding, and numerical coding. As we discussed earlier, exhaustive coding means creating categories that cover every possible responses. Next, mutually exclusive coding requires that categories do not overlap. Likewise, if we have a unidimensional coding, we need to focus on classifying our data based on a single characteristics at a time. This makes the data straightforward and easier to interpret. In alphabetical coding, we need to use letters to represent categories. For example, using A for asthma, B for bronchitis, and so on. It helps us make data entry and reference simpler in some cases. Likewise, in quantitative research, we usually use a numerical coding that assigns numbers to categories such as 1 for male and 2 for female. This is particularly useful for statistical analysis and data processing. This is a coding schemes that should be prepared before data entry, before coding, and before data entry and analysis. The next step is a transcription of data, which refers to the process of transferring the collected data into a datasets. This can be done manually or through a computer. and we can transfer the collected data into the data sets. Commonly used software is SPSS, Stata software, Data software, R software, Info software, as well as Microsoft software. And as a novice researcher and beginners must commonly use Microsoft Excel to enter their data, and then they transfer that data into the SPSS or either one software. The next step is data cleaning. When cleaning our data, the first step is to print out the data file and carefully proofread it. This ensures accuracy and helps us catch any obvious errors or missing values before starting the analysis. Next, we should perform the single field analysis using simple frequency distribution tables. This gives us a basic overview of how often each value occurs in a variable. And next step is the multiple field analysis. In multiple field analysis, the approach depends on the type of data. For categorical data, we use cross tabulation to examine relationship between variables. For continuous data, we draw scatter plots to visualize patterns, trends, or correlations. And while data cleaning, each missing values should be labeled with a suitable explanation. This ensures a reliable and accurate basis for analysis. The next one is the removal of outliers. If our values are invalid, impossible, or extreme, it should be removed from the dataset. In some cases, outliers are simply noted for exclusion when performing specific analysis. Likewise, we should remove the wildcards. Wildcards can occur due to data entry errors. We can use computer program to perform automatic range checks or conduct consistency checks to focus on internal data reliability. This is the example validation of two sets of the same data in Data software. We have entered our data into Data software twice, and then we compare our two sets of data if there is any error in our data entry or not. If we found any errors in our two sets and there is inconsistency in two sets, we can go through the case by case and we clean our data, and we can check our consistency and missing values as well. After checking the missing outliers and after checking the wildcards, outliers, and consistency check, we should also use, while assessing the missing data analysis, then we should identify the pattern of missing data. Is it missing completely at random? Is it missing at random, or is it missing not random? Pattern of missing data is often more important than the amount of data that is missing. If 5% or less of the data is missing in a random pattern, it is generally considered less serious, according to Tabachnik and Fidel 2018. And missing data analysis can be done through complete case analysis, available case analysis, and or imputation approaches. After assessing the missing data and after managing the missing data, we have to check our data for its univariate outliers, which can be detected by Z-score, box plots, histograms, or interquartile range. And any data point whose Z-score falls out of third standard deviation is considered as an outlier. We can also use IQR to detect outliers, and We have different strategies for managing the univariate outliers. Uh, Deletion methods include case deletions and variable deletions. Other approaches include winterization, mean and median substitutions, trimming. Additionally, robust estimation methods can be applied, such as transforming the data using base 10 logarithms, natural logarithms, or square root transformations. Multivariate outlier assessments should be performed after addressing univariate outliers and before conducting multivariate analysis such as regression, factor analysis, or structural equation modeling to ensure accurate results and satisfied statistical assumptions. Multivariate outliers assessment can be performed by using Mahalanobis distance, Cook's distance, leverage and discrepancies, standardized residuals values. According to Tabachnik and Fidel 2018, a Mahalanobis distance greater than 20.52 for 5 predictors is considered indicative of multivariate outliers. Likewise, according to Field and Miles 2010, a standardized residuals value greater than 3.29 is considered as a multivariate outliers. While identifying the outliers, as we discussed earlier, we can use Mahalanobis distance, standardized residuals, and studentized residuals. If we found there is an outliers, we should check for sampling errors, data entry errors, and coding errors. If there is no any sampling error, data entry, and coding error, we should check for leverage and distance. If there is a sampling, data, and coding error, we should delete cases of sampling error, correct data entry, and coding errors. If the value of leverage and cook distance is acceptable, then no action is needed. If the value is greater than acceptable range, we should check for sensitivity analysis. It is often the first step in managing outliers, as they provide an opportunity to examine the influence of the outliers on the robustness of the model estimates. In the context of outlier management, sensitivity analysis involves conducting analysis twice, with and without the outlier cases, to display the influence that they might have on the parameter estimates. We recommend that the results of sensitivity analysis be reported either in the main text or as an appendix. This allows the readers to make informed decisions about the influence of outliers on study findings and determine which statistical model they should use to establish association. If the results of the sensitivity analysis suggest similar estimates with and without the outlier cases, then the risk of bias associated with these extreme values is less of a concern. However, if there are significant discrepancies between the two models and our sample size is large with a small proportion of outlier cases, then one may consider case deletion. And in multivariate outlier management, assessment and management, we should proceed from outlier identification, data screening and cleaning, outlier influence, parameter sensitivity, and outlier management. This is the table related to the statistical analysis. If we have the data of nominal categories of two groups, we can use, if we have independent group test, then we can choose chi-square test, and if we have dependent group test, we can choose McNemar's test. Likewise, if we have three groups, we can use chi-square for independent group test, and for dependent group test, we can use Cochrane Q. If we have an ordinal level of measurement data, then if we have two groups, we can choose Mann-Whitney test, and if we have dependent group test, we can choose Wilcoxon sign rank test. Likewise, if we have three groups of independent group test, we can choose Kruskal-Wallis as test, and if we have dependent group test, we can use Friedman test. Likewise, if we have an interval or a ratio level of measurement with two groups of independent group, then we can use t-test, and if we have dependent groups, we can use pair t-test, and if we have three groups, we can choose ANOVA, and if we have dependent group test more than three or more than three groups, we can choose repeated measures ANOVA. And we can also conduct correlational analysis to examine the relationship strength. For chi-square test, we can use phi coefficient, and for ordinal data, we can use Spearman rank correlations, and for the data of interval or ratio level measurement, we can use Pearson coefficient. There are different assumptions that should be checked prior to parametric test: outlier assessment, normality of the data, independence of observations, linearity. Data should be in interval or ratio scales, homogeneity of variance or homoscedasticity should be achieved, and the sample size should be large enough to conduct a parametric test. This is the commonly used parametric test, t-test, ANOVA, correlations, and linear regressions. For t-test, for the independent groups, we should check for the requirements. If we have only one independent variables or grouping variables, that is gender, and only we have two labels for that independent variables, that is male or female, and if we have only one dependent variable, we can use t-test for the independent groups. And prior to conducting t-test, we should test these assumptions such as independence. The two groups are independent of one another, and normality should be on dependent variable, and homogeneity of variance should be achieved. Likewise, for correlation statistics, we should have related pairs of scores, and the variables should be measured at least at the ordinal level, and linearity and homoscedasticity assumptions should be made for correlation statistics. Regarding ANOVA, one-way ANOVA test with post-hoc comparisons, we should have only one independent variable, that is ethnicity, and that variables should have two or more than two labels, such as Brahman, Kshetri, Newar, and must be only one DV. And the assumptions such as normality and homogeneity of variance should be achieved prior to one-way analysis of variance. If we have data that measure the mean scores of subject during three or more than three times, and we have measured the mean scores of subject under three different conditions or more different conditions, we can use one-way ANOVA, repeated measures ANOVA. There are some assumptions that should be achieved prior to one-way repeated measures. That is, DV should be continuous level of measurement, and multivariate normality should be achieved. Within groups, variables must have two or more groups that are related or have matched pair, no spurious outliers, and we should check for Moseley test of sphericity, and we should have the randomly selected samples. Likewise, for the multiple linear regression analysis, There should have no missing data. Data should be normally distributed in terms of multivariate as well as univariate normality, and there should have no outliers, and bivariate linearities should be achieved, and multivariate linearities should also be assessed, as well as the homoscedasticity of our data should be achieved. In addition, there should be no multicollinearity, which can be assessed by correlation, tolerance, variance inflation factors, eigenvalue, condition index, and variance proportions. Additionally, we should also check for autocorrelations, and our data should be free from independence of should be independent of error terms. And error terms, that means no autocorrelations, and Durbin-Watson tests should be within 1.5 to 2.5. This is the histogram which can be used to assess the normality of our data, the multivariate normality which can assess from this histogram. And this is the multivariate linearity which can be assessed, and homoscedasticity can be assessed by this scatter plot. And for logistic regressions, we need to have dependent variables as a categorical form, and should consist of two groups, male versus females, low versus high. The independent variables can be continuous, discrete, dichotomous, or a mixture of any of these. The size of the sample can affect model convergence. And before proceeding to logistic regression analysis, the research team should check assumptions such as a lack of strongly influential outliers, no multicollinearity, should have multivariate normality, linearity in the logit for any continuous independent variables, independence of errors, and 10 to 20 events per covariate. This is a simple examples where we can use parametric as well as non-parametric test. Independent test, if we have a dependent variable by group, we can use independency test, and alternatives of independency test is Mann-Whitney test. If we are assessing the pair differences, we can use pair t-test as a parametric test, and alternative as a Wilcoxon-Sine-Rank test. If we are assessing the difference based on the residuals or dependent variables, we can use Onway ANOVA. An alternative test might be Kruskal-Wallis test. And if we are assessing the difference based on the residuals of measurements of 3 or more occasions, we can use repeated measures ANOVA, and the alternative test for it is Friedman test. And if we have at least one of the variables is normally distributed, then we can use Pearson correlation coefficient. If the data is not normally distributed, then we can use the Spearman rank correlations coefficient. And for linear regressions, we should check normality based on residuals. And if our data is normally distributed, then we have to we can conduct linear regression. If our data is not normally distributed, then we need to transform our data. This is the examples where we could use the different parametric tests if we are going to compare means between two distinct independent groups. And we have research questions: is the mean systolic blood pressures at baseline for patient assigned to placebo different from the mean for patients assigned to the treatment group? If we have objectives to compare to quantitative measurements taken from the same individuals, and we have research questions: is there a significant change in systolic blood pressures between baseline and 6-month follow-up measurement in the treatment group? In these two objectives and research questions, which test might be appropriate? Think about it. I think We can use for the first objective is two sample t-test, and alternative test might be Mann-Whitney U-test or Wilcoxon-Sign rank test. And the next one is the peer t-test to compare quantitative measurements taken from the same individuals. And the alternative test might be Wilcoxon-Sign rank test. And another objective to compare means between three or more distinct independent groups. And we have research questions if experiment had three groups. Example, placebo, new drug 1 and new drug 2. The researcher might want to know whether the mean systolic blood pressure at baseline differ among the three groups. And another objective is to estimate the degree of relationship between two quantitative variables. Is systolic blood pressure associated with the patient's age? In these two objectives, which test statistics might be appropriate? The first objectives can be made by using analysis of variance ANOVA test, and alternative test might be Kruskal-Wallis test. And for second objective, we can use Pearson correlation coefficient. Our alternative test might be Spearman's rank correlations. After analyzing our data, we have to present our data. And after statistical analysis and considering our the readability and the population of interest to whom we want to disseminate our findings, we need to choose either graphic presentations or tabulations. If we are departing or disseminating our research findings to the academic our scientific community, we need to use the tabular forms, academic tables. But if we are disseminating our findings to the lay public, then it is better to disseminate our finding in graphical presentations so that it is easier to understand the research findings to them. Finally, good data management is not a goal in itself, but rather is the key conduit leading to knowledge, discovery, and innovation, and to subsequent data and knowledge integration and reuse by the community after the data publication process. So, take-home message is while managing our data, we should start early, and we should communicate our data to the research team and to the scientific community appropriately and consistently. And we should edit, classify, code, data entry, data cleaning, and data presentations appropriately for appropriate and good management of data. Thank you so much. Have a nice